Hello, and welcome to a segment I am calling Food Facts, Episode 1. In the course of the research that I do for the writing that I do, particularly focusing on the Middle Ages, European Middle Ages, I come across a lot of different information that breaks a lot of misconceptions and biased views that I have regarding what the Middle Ages were like, particularly the late Middle Ages. And one thing that comes up that people don't really ever think about a whole lot is food. What did people eat and drink in this era that I'm probably basing my writing on very loosely? And so a couple of things come to mind. First, I want you to think about Italian cuisine. What do you think of when you think of traditional or authentic Italian cuisine? You probably think of pasta, right? You may think of marinara, which is tomato-based sauce, right? Well, there's a problem with that because tomatoes are an American plant, which means they were from the New World. The first evidence of tomatoes in Italy dates back to the 1500s, and it was originally considered an ornamental plant, meaning they grew it to look at it, not to eat it. Another thing that's very interesting to me, Americans, if you say marmalade or marmalade to an American, they always assume that you mean orange. But marmalade, or in Portuguese marmalada, is actually marmelo jam, which is quince, not oranges. And there's a really important reason for that. In the Middle Ages, oranges, whenever we find them in a recipe, and there are some recipes from the Middle Ages and a lot more from the Renaissance, but whenever you find oranges in a recipe, it's always paired with other fruit, sugar, saffron, honey, other things that are really sweet. And that's because the oranges in the Middle Ages were all bitter, because they came from the Middle East and sweet oranges hadn't been cultivated yet. So in Middle Ages, marmalade or marmalada would have been made from quince because orange jam or orange marmalade would have been disgusting. Another thing that I think is interesting is tiramisu. This is considered an Italian dessert. It's served at most Italian restaurants, but it contains at least two ingredients that didn't exist in the Mediterranean region of Italy naturally. One of them is coffee, which doesn't have any real documented evidence of until the 15th century and also came from the Middle East, and cocoa, which is a New World plant, so again, couldn't have reached Italy before the 15 or 1600s at the earliest, and probably didn't perfect, turning it into powder and using it until sometime later. The reason that I bring these up is that when you're writing for a particular era and you have a particular world in mind, it is really helpful to do research down to those details. As they say, the devil is in the details, for better or for worse. And it's really important that you look at things and you try to break your own misconceptions. Our beliefs, our ideas are heavily biased on what's happened within the last 5, 10, even 100 years. But if you go back further and research the period that you're basing your writing on, you actually learn a lot of real historical facts that you just simply didn't believe, that you didn't know. And that's a good way to influence your writing. And then, of course, there's always the alternative. If you're writing in a fantasy universe or you're writing a fantasy fiction, it's your world. So if you want to say that these people have coffee, even though it's comparably technology to the 1600s, by all means, they can have coffee. And I believe that anyone in any world of any time should have coffee. And lastly, to prove that I'm not just harping on Italian cuisines or Italian restaurants, there is one thing that we think of as Italian that actually truly is distinctly Italian. Even though it may have also started originally in the Middle East, there's one plant that is definitely indigenous to the Italian region and has a huge influence going way back in history, and that's olives. I want to thank you for joining me on Food Facts Episode 1, and I hope this opens some people's eyes to some different ideas that are out there, the importance of doing research for even small things like clothing or food when you're writing your stories, and as always, keep writing. Thanks.